Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@eapen.info. My guest today is Professor James McGaugh, who is Emeritus Professor of Neurobiology and Behavior at University of California, Irvine. He is also Fellow of the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. Welcome, Jim.
Hello there.
I want to start with one of your older papers entitled Making Lasting Memories, Remembering the Significant, in which you say, although forgetting is the common fate of most of our experiences, much evidence indicates that emotional arousal enhances the storage of memories, thus serving to create selectively lasting memories of our more important experiences. You say that neurobiological systems mediating emotional arousal and memory are very closely linked. Before we get into it, Jim, I wondered if you could sort of define memory a little bit and have our understanding of memory changed over time? Do we have a better understanding of what we mean by memory now?
All right. Memory is something that we infer from individuals and from animals. All we ever see is behavior. And on the basis of behavior, we make inferences that a prior experience produced some kind of a change in this case, the brain of the animal or the human, such that they can behave differently. And we make inferences that there are memory processes underlying the change in behavior. Now, the function of memory is to allow us to behave. If we didn't have memory, we would be just like vegetables. We're able to have an experience, remember that experience, and change or repeat our behavior on the basis of that experience in order to survive. So memory is a fundamental set of abilities that aid in our survival.
Right. Yeah, so that's a very interesting way to think about it. So clearly for animals, we have to infer memory through their behavior. But in the case of humans, couldn't we actually say what we mean by memory? I mean, we have potentially a larger set of data that we can use to define memory, right?
Oh, a larger set of data, but the inference is the same. If I watch you play tennis, for example, I can make inferences about your ability to change your behavior on the basis of experience, and that's all I have. In the case of yourself, I presume that you learned to speak language. Now, if I observed you when you were a child, I could see the process of your acquiring the language. But all of the things that we do are based on experiences that then cause us to change our behavior in response to the experience. And as scientists, what we try to do is to figure out what happens in the brain that enables that change in behavior or the repeat of behavior, which is based on the experience. And it's the same inferential process that we use when talking about human behavior as when we're talking about animal behavior.
So more tactically, James, so suppose I say, I saw X, right? So I'm talking about very short-term memory. I saw X last Wednesday on street Y. I'm sort of articulating something from the past that I guess at that point, would you say I am making an inference or I am actually memorizing
No,
something?
you're using information. I would have to make the inference that that's based on memory, and of course it is, because there isn't any other way to explain your ability to do that. But you're just using the information that you acquired at a previous time in order to affect your behavior at this time. And that's what memory does. It allows us to use experiences in order to change our behavior to make it appropriate for the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, this has a lot of implications for judicial proceedings, witnesses. So when people say they have seen somebody or they have something in the memory, um, how do you define that? So in a very mechanistic way, in a computer, we can store something and we can retrieve it. Now, that is not really what's happening in the brain, is it?
Well, not in the same way, but we do have processes that are evolved in the storage of information, and then in the accessing of that information. But from what you said, I wouldn't necessarily take what you said to be true. I'd have to study to see what were the circumstances under which the information was available to you, and then study you at a later time to see how your behavior changed as a consequence of that. I'm not going to take your word for it. Uh,
Right, right. But presumably, though, the process you're going through to analyze the information that I have provided, is also something that you have learned, right? So it is sort of a chicken and egg problem in some ways.
well, learning is a very natural sort of thing. You don't you don't you don't
Yeah,
have to learn. Um, uh, when I say 2 + 2 is 4, you have already learned the language that's involved in order to understand that. But there's always learning that is occurring. Learning is occurring all the time, all the time. Uh, our
yeah,
brains are set up just to acquire the information so we can hold it in order to behave. We had to do that, for example, in this conversation. I have to listen to you, and you have to listen to me, and you are remembering what I said. I'm remembering what you said in order to engage in conversation. That's going on all the time.
right. And in a very short term situation like that, most of that information is discarded, right? So there is a difference between sort of long term memory and short term memory, right?
Yes, they're probably based on different processes. We don't know the details, but if I say to you 947263, you can repeat that immediately. You have a memory system that allows that to happen. Tomorrow, you would remember that you and I discussed some numbers, and that would be it. You wouldn't that would not need a lasting memory, just that kind of experience. But many experiences can be transformed into lasting memory, either by sustained repetition or by emotional arousal, which will generate a strong memory of even somewhat otherwise insignificant experiences. So we have two ways of changing a very short memory into a lasting memory.
Okay, so that's part of the paper. And so is emotional arousal, as you say, is that a necessary requirement for lasting memory?
No, um, you can rehearse things and create lasting memory. Just repeat something over and over again, or experience something again and again, and a memory will be formed, and the memory will be a lasting memory. And that's what we do a lot of in our daily lives, where we experience the same kinds of things on a regular basis. However, a single event can be turned into experience can be turned into a lasting memory if there is emotional arousal at the time, and the emotional arousal will produce changes in the body and in the brain then, which will create the lasting memory. And that's what I have studied.
Okay. And so what's the circuitry that is involved there, Jim? Could you go into so what happens in the presence of an emotional arousal and some memory that gets stored in a very lasting fashion that you can always recollect. There's something happening in the brain in the presence of an emotion,
Yes.
right?
Uh,
So what is mechanistically
all
that
right. So
happens?
you have an exciting experiences of some kind. You have an automobile accident, or you get injured, or somebody gives you an ice cream cone when you didn't expect it. It can be very positive. It can be very unpleasant. There is a surge, a release of adrenaline into the body. That adrenaline then activates the brain, which causes a release of neurotransmitters in the brain. And a major one which is involved is noradrenaline, or norepinephrine. When that is released, it activates a very specific region of the brain called the amygdala, which is an
Yeah.
almond-shaped structure. We have two of them, one on either side in the brain. When that region gets activated, it sends its projections to a wide array of brain regions, and it says, in effect, store the experience you've just had. It's important. That's what the amygdala does. It sends out the instructions, and so whatever happens then will be stored more strongly because of the activation of the amygdala to turn on the processing in these different regions of the brain that are designed to process different kinds of information. Now, the amygdala doesn't know anything. It just gets turned on. It's an activator, it's a modifier, it's an arousal system. But it's there designed so that when it's activated, when memories are being processed in other places, the memories for storage are processed much more strongly through the activation of this system.
Hmm. So I'm thinking, Jim, this would have had some selection advantages. I would imagine early humans wanted to store either very pleasant or very
Absolutely.
unpleasant memories, right? The latter one has potentially big survival advantages.
Absolutely. The Neanderthal shows up at a stream and looks up, and there's a saber-toothed tiger across from it in the stream. It's a good thing to remember that and not go back to that particular region of the stream. So this is a system which is designed to selectively make strong memories of important experiences. And it goes on all the time. It is online. It's happening right now as you and I talk. If something, if you fell right now, if you fell and you hurt your arm, that would cause a very strong arousal. And you would remember, oh, on this day when we were discussing, I fell and I hurt my arm. And you'll remember that for a long period of time. So this is an online process, and it serves a very adaptive function of making important experiences turned into lasting memories.
Mm. And obviously, this is also important. Otherwise, we will start memorizing a lot of unimportant information, even though there may not be a capacity problem. there might still be sort of an,
Well,
efficiency problem if we start
that's
remembering
a very
everything,
good
right?
point. It's a very good point that this is selective and it's not going to jam up the system. It says, remember this, remember this, remember this. All of the important things get selected for that. So it's a highly adaptive and highly selective system that is responsive in us and in animals all the time. Highly adaptive.
Yeah. So the instruction set running in the amygdala is basically making this differentiation or sort of a
Yes.
prioritization.
Precisely,
Yeah, go
precisely.
ahead.
It's prioritizing experiences for memory.
Right, right. And so I remember reading long time ago, Jim, talking about memory. I don't have very good memory of it, but there are some diseases where people are unable to forget anything, that they tend to store all information, and that becomes a big issue for that person. Is there such a thing?
Well, in one sense, there is for a very small, highly specialized group of individuals who have what's called eidetic imagery, in which they can have an experience and then remember that experience in great detail. There's an autistic man in London, for example, who is flown over cities and then the next day can draw the rooftops of the cities in a high degree of accuracy. But this is highly unusual. Then there is a larger group of people in the United States. We have perhaps 100, maybe 150 individuals who have what I have called highly superior autobiographical memory. These individuals are able to remember the activities that they did engaged in for most of the days of their lives with a high degree of reliability. Now, they don't have detailed memory of every event of every day, but they have a general memory. On this day, I went shopping with my mother. I have a fight with my boyfriend. Or I went for a drive. The kind of memory that you and I have of yesterday. But they have that for most of the days of their lives. And that constitutes a subgroup of people in our world who have that specialized kinds of memory, which does not seem to follow the rules that we've just talked about, in which we have selective memory for important things. They have strong memories of all kinds of experiences.
So do they also remember the timestamp? Like, would they say, last June 5th, 6 p.m., I
Yes,
I did this?
yes.
So they're timestamping
They
it as
have
well.
a
Okay.
highly detailed representation of the days of their life. They know the days of the week on when things happen. And we've tested these individuals extensively to discover that what they say is actually true. In some cases, they kept diaries so we could check the diaries. And in other cases, we use other techniques for finding out. So these individuals are unlike us in that they are able to remember the days of their lives in much more detail and for a much longer period of time than you and I can. The interesting thing is that it doesn't appear to have any particular adaptive value for them. And I find that quite interesting as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned autism, and subset there, photographic, sort of memory, that they can have very detailed memory of something. But this subset, who's able to memorize events for a long period of time in a time-stamped fashion, is there any known mental diseases that are correlated with that condition, or is that considered to be a condition in
You're
itself?
talking about the highly superior autobiographical memory? And yes.
Yeah,
Well, we
yeah,
have
yeah.
done several studies with my colleagues. One was just a structural analysis of the brain using MRI, and we identified a couple of regions that appeared to be different in size or in shape in individuals who have this highly superior autobiographical memory, but nothing that was particularly instructive. It was just descriptive, and it didn't tell us anything. In collaboration with a group in Italy, we also have done studies looking at the activation of brains of these subjects while they are remembering using functional imaging, and have discovered that their brains act differently when they are recalling from the way that your and my brain works. So the big clue is that these people have an ability and a style of remembering which is different from us, and the difference may lie then not in what they have learned, but in how their brains to access information that they have learned. So it looks as though they have a different different memory retrieval system, and I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And so these memories, they have to be involved in it, right? What I'm thinking is that suppose they read a, sort of a history book or something, and can they actually recollect history in
No,
that fashion? Or is
no,
this,
it
yeah,
doesn't
it's
work that
different.
way. It doesn't appear to help them in education. There's no evidence that the memory system works in that way. It works only to have them help recall their daily activities. We've tested them on all kinds of memory tests to see if they're better in standard memorizing in the laboratory, and they are not. So this is just something about the way they access their daily lives, how they store their daily lives, and how they access the information from those daily lives, the retrieval system that they have to do that. It's highly interesting, and why it is that it does not carry over to ordinary school learning, which it does not, that's a mystery.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. One could speculate that everybody has this information, but the retrieval system is not able to retrieve it, in the sense that the memory system do not consider this to be important enough to be
Yeah,
lasting in a typical person. Although, just like a computer, when we store something and then deleted it, it is still there, right? We just
yes.
can't retrieve it. Uh, is it a similar
We don't know
situation?
how much information you have. You don't know how
Yeah.
much information you have. Um, it's very interesting that the way that things will pop into our heads from the distant past. You may hear just a brief tune, for example, and all of a sudden you can remember a complete tune of something that you learned decades ago. It'll pop into your head and you say, where did that come from? That was stored there. You haven't used it in a long time, and it comes up. We all know about what's called the tip of the tongue memory. We all experience it, in which we try to remember something and we can't remember it. And then about 20 minutes later, it
Yeah.
pops into our heads. Well, now, what was that all about? That says that we, in some way, gave instructions to our brain to search for information that was there, and the brain went to work, and 20 minutes later, it found it and popped it up again. So that raises the question, how much information do we have in our brains, and to what extent is our forgetting, what we call normal forgetting, is simply an indication that over time our retrieval system has a more difficult time locating information that is really there in the brain. So maybe we've stored an enormous amount of information in the brain, and the problem is retrieving that information.
Right, right. And so you mentioned some of the stress hormones when you have
Yes.
emotional arousal, norepinephrine and corticosterone. And so are there experiments that shows, let me ask it differently, can we actually inject somebody with these hormones and see if there is there
Oh,
is an
yes.
impact in
In our
memory?
in our experiments, that's what we do. That's what we do. We train animals, and we administer, in many experiments, administered epinephrine or cortisol immediately after training while memories are in the process of becoming consolidated, and we could enhance memory. We could also do that by injecting the substances directly into the amygdala. So we could put noradrenaline directly into the amygdala after training and find enhanced memory at a later time. So we've done many experiments in which we have administered the stress hormones and the substances activated by stress hormones, given them to animals and to human subjects, and shown that we could enhance memory if we administer these substances shortly after learning and then test them subjects a day or a week later.
Yeah. Is there a practical product out there that allows humans to enhance memory this way?
It can't work that way. If you just think about what we've said, it's timing. It's timing. So if you have an experience and the brain has to be activated to store that particular experience. So there is an increase for a short period of time that allows for that to happen. It's not a sustained level of epinephrine or cortisol. It's a pulse of it. So you have experience, and there has to be a selective increase at that particular time in order to turn on the amygdala to say, store this, not something, store this. Right. And so it wouldn't work to have a high level of epinephrine or cortisol because it wouldn't give you the selectivity that's needed.
So I'm just thinking, Jim. So the rat experiments, can we actually cycle the stress hormones? And is there any, what I'm asking, is there any sort of reprogrammability of the memory? So presumably, if you give the stress hormones to a rat, the rat will then have a higher level of memory for an event. I'm just wondering if there is some other way to reprogram that or erase that memory in some way.
Yes, the erasing of the memory was first really experimentally done in 1949 by a man named Duncan at Northwestern University using electroshock stimulation. You may know, or the listeners may know, that electroshock was introduced in the 1930s as a treatment for various kinds of mental disorders, particularly depression. And in the course of that, it was discovered that people who were given electroshock had memory problems. And so this scientist did an experiment in which he trained rats on a simple task and gave an electroshock either immediately after they received training or at some period of time afterwards, up to an hour, and discovered that he could prevent the memory from being formed if the electroshock was given immediately afterwards, but not if it was given an hour later. So this was termed an interference with the fixation or the consolidation of the memory. So that can be, the erasure can be done if it is done very quickly after an experience. But if a time passes, an hour or 2 hours or several, then the memory is fixed and it can't be modified. It was those very experiments that gave me the idea of giving adrenaline immediately after training to see if I could enhance memory rather than impair it. And so we have the influences on consolidation that can go either way, either enhancing or impairing if the treatment is given shortly after the particular experience in question.
Right. But we cannot chemically erase it, like you say. Once it's
That's
set,
right.
it's sort
Once
of
it's
set.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is great, Jim. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we talk more about consolidating memories.
Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
This is a Scientific Sense podcast providing unscripted conversations with leading academics and researchers on a variety of topics. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, please reach out to info@scientificsense.com.
So we are back. Jim, we are talking about memories, how lasting memories are formed, the role played by stress hormones, perhaps the amygdala, stress hormones in the amygdala making a significant contribution to making memories more lasting. Um, and more generally, you call it consolidating memories. So you have a paper in 2015. You say our own experiences as well as the findings of many studies suggest that emotionally arousing experiences can create lasting memories. And this autobiographical article, you say, provides a brief summary of the author's research investigating neurobiological systems responsible for the influence of emotional arousal on the consolidation of lasting memories. So one thing I was thinking about, Jim, um, so when something happens, if it is emotionally charging, then there will be stress-related hormones in the body, and that gets into higher levels of lasting memories. But again, going to the rat experiments that you have run, suppose you can actually sort of embed the stress hormone production, then you can actually show, I would imagine, those are not lasting, the memories, I mean.
You mean, can we block the formation?
Yeah, block or block the effects, I would say, of the
Oh,
of the
yes.
hormones. Yeah.
In the rat experiments, we could have animals have a very highly arousing experience and yet have no memory of it just by blocking the activation of adrenaline and noradrenaline in the brain, or by deactivating the amygdala. So the animals can turn a arousing experience into a weak, unimportant one that is not remembered. So we can do that experimentally, and we've done that in many, many experiments. Yes.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'm thinking about PTSD.
Yes.
Clearly, humans, yeah, I'm just speculating here.
Yeah.
Once, as you say, when the memory is set, we cannot do a lot about it. But are there applications in PTSD for humans?
Yes, there are lots of implications. I'll just tell you about one experiment which was done by Professor Roger Pittman at Harvard University, who became acquainted with all of the research that we were doing and decided to do the following study. He had nurses stationed at the many hospitals throughout Boston, so that when somebody came in from an accident or an injury, they asked them if the patient would be willing to participate in an experiment. Half of them were given a adrenaline blocker, and half of them were given a control. And then they were tested a couple of months later for signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And the subjects that had been given the blocker of epinephrine showed fewer signs of stress, emotional stress, or PTSD when tested 2 months later. So the results matched very nicely what we had obtained in laboratory animals with rats. The subjects that were given the beta, it was a beta blocker, which was blocking the epinephrine, had fewer signs of having had the memory arousing experience when they were tested 2 days later. So I think, yes, there are implications of what we have done. The problem is that this system is very time dependent. So you can't take somebody who has PTSD and say, now we're going to get rid of it. No, it's too late for that. The PTSD has already been developed.
Right, right. Yeah, that goes back to what you were saying. Once the memory is set, there isn't a lot you can do. But it has some possibilities. So, so for example, in a war theater, if sort of a intervention, intervention in anticipation of a situation, you could potentially take some sort of a beta blocker
Sure.
that might
Yeah.
reduce the probability, right?
Yeah. If you could anticipate that there's going to be a highly arousing, unpleasant experience, you could probably do something to prevent it. But there is a lot of work going on right now using this kind of thinking to decrease the emotionality that people are experiencing with PTSD. And it goes like this: you have a person who has PTSD, and you do something to recreate the conditions very slightly, and then show them that it is safe, or to give a blocker of epinephrine at that point, and teach them now that something that used to be horrible is now safe.
Okay. And so that's interesting. So you could potentially have after the effect, could potentially try to reverse it.
Yeah, you could now teach the effect to go away using this
Yeah.
principle. Yes, and that there is a lot of research in many laboratories throughout the world doing that kind of research right at the present time.
Okay. Yeah, I want to touch on another paper you have, Highly Superior Autobiographical Memory. We talked a bit about this already. You say that the ability to learn and remember is quite obviously essential for survival. We benefit from experiences by using past experiences to guide our behavior, our memories enable for our future. But despite the critical importance of memory, we forget. And in some sense, forgetting is a necessary condition for survival, right?
Yes, we don't want to we don't want to crowd our brains with a lot of useful information, and so we have selectivity. We forget the unimportant things and we remember the important things, and that's the way we get through life. And that's why the people with highly superior autobiographical memory are so puzzling, because they remember an awful lot of non-important information, an awful lot. And we don't know why that is. And we don't know why their lives are not negatively affected by this, but they're not negatively affected in any serious way. It's a big puzzle.
Have you seen the same sort of a condition in animals?
No, we do not see the same condition with animals.
It's tough to really pick up, right? So, uh, uh, I guess so. In a rat model, for example, will the rat be a better solver of what do you call it? You put the rat in some kind of a maze, right? So will the rat be a better solver of the maze if it is able to remember things in this fashion?
Well, we don't know. We don't know how to find out whether a rat experiences every day of his life, because they don't have important experiences.
Yeah.
We'd have to study them in the wild, and we don't. We study them in a laboratory. In a laboratory, every day they're in a cage, in a white room, in a small cage, and they get food and water. So they don't have a lot of experiences that we can call on. You'd have to study these animals in the wild, and we don't do that.
Right. Yeah, so in conclusion, Jim, in this research, in this area, what do you think would be the most exciting direction for us to pursue in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the most interesting set of questions before us in the field of memory have to do with retrieval. That is, it has to do with access, because I'm drawn increasingly to the conclusion that we have a lot of information in the brain that may be stored very weakly, but nonetheless it's there, and for the reasons that we've discussed, the tip of the tongue memory and so on. So what are the ways, what are the methods that can be used to understand how memories are stored in such a way that they are accessible for long periods of time, and in many cases completely intact memories? And that's a set of problems that are being addressed right now. The research on memory retrieval is starting, but I think that this is a field which needs to be intensively investigated, because it'll tell us a lot more about the mystery of the brain, a lot more about the mystery of memory.
Yeah, so what's our current understanding, Jim, of how the memory is stored? It's sort of an electrochemical process, right? Do we know more, mechanistically how the memory is stored in the
Well,
brain?
every day we learn more about changes in the brain that are induced by experience, and we presume that these changes then are a basis for memory. That's still a hypothesis, not a declared law as yet. So that when animals have experience, or when brains are activated, changes can take place between the connections of neurons. So the rule is, if neurons talk to each other, they change. And the little changes in what are called the synapses, the connections between neurons, those changes are induced by experiences, so that there's greater connectivity within the brain. And the basic hypothesis is that this kind of connectivity, bringing together large numbers of nerve cells, that constitute the memory. That's the hypothesis. And research increasingly looks as though that is true. So progress is being made in understanding the fundamental levels at the cellular level in the brain, and the conditions at the cellular level that induce the changes and maintain them. That work is going on very successfully, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so when you say change, you mean sort of a physical
Yes.
change you can
Yes,
see?
a physical change you can see. Yes.
And so could we actually see, so suppose you take two different brains, one has more memories and the other less compared to the first one. Um, can we actually predict how the two brains might compare to
No,
each
because the
other?
changes are very small. We have
Right.
billions, literally billions of nerve cells, and I don't know, an estimate of 10,000 connections on every nerve cell. So the number of possible interactions is huge. It's beyond imagination. And so the problem
Yeah.
of discovering the changes underlying a particular memory, where that's located and how that works, is almost an unfathomable question when you think about it. If I say right now that the moon is made of blue cheese, that's new information, and that's now stored in your brain, at least temporarily. Right?
Right.
The moon is made
Right.
of blue cheese. It's in your brain right now. Now, how are we going to go into your brain and find the particular cells that have been altered out of the billions of cells that are there? And it's not going to be just a few cells. It's going to be change in the interconnections among a large number of cells, according to theory. So locating the physical basis of a memory is going to be an extraordinarily difficult task for the future.
Yeah, but you did mention though, Jim, that there are some structural features that seem to be different in the autobiographical memory
But
folks.
they're not sufficiently refined. It's just the regions of the
Right.
brain are larger, smaller, a different shape. It's not at the micro level. We don't have
Okay.
evidence at the micro level.
Right. Right. Yeah, this is great, Jim. This is a very fascinating area. I think the more we learn about it, the more questions
That,
arise in
that's
this
right.
area. And there's obviously other fields that are also very interested in this, like artificial intelligence and so
Yes.
on. And there isn't a lot of very good understanding of how the brain accomplishes what it does, and memory is a big
Yes.
part of it. So, excellent. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jim, for spending time with me, and good
Well,
luck with
thank
this
you.
research.
I've enjoyed our discussion and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This is a Scientific Sense podcast providing unscripted conversations with leading academics and researchers on a variety of topics. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, please reach out to info@scientificsense.com.